So, hello and welcome back to the next episode of the Self-Development with Tactics fucking podcast. And this is actually the second episode that I'm recording quite right now. I just recorded the first one, and this is now the second one. In between, I just made myself some grain coffee, I think it is called, and also with a few scoops of cacao powder, which is actually something that I pretty like to do because I think it kind of gives me the option to take in a little more calories because quite struggling a little bit with putting on a little bit weight because actually for building muscle you just need a little more calories than you're just burning. Therefore this is actually a pretty fucking good way. But nevertheless, it's not about me, me and my nutrition, and me and my, fucking diet. But it is more about Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink, and actually another person that they didn't point out, I think. So this is actually the book that I'm quite reading currently, but I kind of stopped because I read it on an e-reader and it was not my e-reader, and therefore I just do not have I do have the ability, but often it comes to the point that I do just not have the time for it, and therefore I'm pretty fucking pumped to go through this one. And I always was like, yeah, no, I just don't want to go through this, even though I knew that this is a fucking good book because I'm actually reading it on my own, which is totally not the way I should go, because it's more about you and it's not about me actually being like, oh no, I do not want to just spoil myself and whatever. It's more about, I want to give you as much value and as much knowledge I know so that you can just benefit from these videos or the podcast, whatever you're listening to. So Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink, but actually Extreme Ownership. I do quite remember, or I do quite think that this is actually a book not only by him. No. Oh my god. I've once made the mistake that I actually do just used Amazon, but the problem is that you can always just see my addresses, or my address, which is actually, by Jocko Willink, Willink, yes, and Life, or it's Leif, Life, Babin. How do you pronounce it? Life. Okay, you actually say it Life. Actually pretty interesting that a lot of, I think a lot of platforms actually do not point out that it is not only from Jocko Willink, but at the end they both did the same. I think they both were actually in the same team as well, so they both are Navy SEALs, or were Navy SEALs actually, and then they just decided to pretty much write this book or create this book because it pretty much kind of teaches you certain things about ownership and about leadership by examples or through examples from actual war scenarios, or scenarios Jocko Willink and his partner or his friend had to go through, which is actually a pretty nice way to do this. And you can definitely see, these are extreme moments and these are extreme scenarios these two people were in, but you can learn a lot from it. So I actually only got to the first point of it, or the first kind of tip. It is also written pretty good and is therefore pretty nice to read. And because they are all of them are stories, so all of these tips kind of get packed into a story and makes it really easy to digest and also remember, because we are just story animals. So Extreme Ownership is written by Jocko Willink, a SEAL leader who explains how the lessons he learned in combat are relevant to leaders in any role. The importance of team is emphasized. You are only as good as the man or woman behind you. This book provides fundamental leadership lessons through Willink's insightful combat experiences and stories. Willink examines a number of leadership concepts that have been proven as effective in both combat and business scenarios, which is quite interesting, that they actually work. But this also just kind of underlines the point that I'm maybe often making, that, every time I'm reading something, it might be like, okay, I'm now just through reading the certain thing that I'm just reading right now, I'm understanding another thing that I've read once a few weeks or even a few months ago, that just pops into my mind, and then I'm like, which is actually the same thing as yesterday. Yesterday I read something, and then I was like, yeah, man, this makes sense now. I quite now understand why it was about Gary, why Gary always talks about this, and why Gary just makes this point all the time. And it did, quite been like, okay, it makes sense for me now, which is totally the good thing about actually reading a few things and quite a lot of things, that actually you kind of just build up your knowledge in, quite every area. But yeah, so who is the summary for? If you're a leader in any area of life, also a parent, I would say, then this is a great read for you. Extreme Ownership is written by Jocko Willink, a SEAL leader, blah, 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 blah. Yeah. So about the author, American Jocko Willink served 20 years in the United States Navy SEALs. After multiple deployments in Asia, Middle East, and Europe, Willink retired in 2010. He has since written Extreme Ownership with some help from fellow SEAL Leif Babin, and launches the Echelon Front, where they teach leadership principles. Willink now hosts the Jocko podcast weekly with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu expert Echo Charles, which, a funny story behind this one. I actually sometimes just actually watched his podcast, because there's actually another video version of it as well. But listening to it is quite interesting, because you can totally just understand. Maybe it's only because I read the book before, but you can totally understand that he has a lot of knowledge, he knows what he's talking about, and he can actually give you some value. But the funny thing that I wanted to say is that I always meant that Echo Charles isn't like a jiu-jitsu expert or something. I always thought like, this was his kind of nickname when they were in the SEAL team, Echo Charles, what's up? Okay, now this is a little bit, everything is getting clearer and clearer. This is just really nice to have. So in the summary, Willink's book is dedicated to the leadership, and we'll begin the summary with a brief description of what Willink considers to be an effective leader. We will move on to a discussion around underperformers, teams, leaders, and ego before diving into the second part of the book, where Willink outlines the laws of combat and ultimately the laws of leadership. The final section in Willink's book is dedicated to maintaining the victory of leadership, what a leader's checklist should look like, and what some common things leaders need to be aware of are. We will talk about missions a lot in this summary, but keep in mind that a mission doesn't have to be combat related. Consider any big task or project you find yourself facing your mission. So the book summary, or the actual beginning of this book summary, and leadership. The first point that Willink makes in his book is that a leader is only as good as their team. A leader cannot lead alone, which totally makes sense. You could be a very strong leader, which actually just makes a really big part of having a good team. The leader is a very, very, very important factor of an overall team. But if you just have a lot of just failing links, or a lot of just bad links in your team, then you can just be the best leader and nothing will happen. A leader cannot lead alone, they need a team behind them with a common goal. And Willink explains that the only true test for a successful leader is whether or not his team finds success. And that's totally true. For all the definitions, descriptions, and characterizations of leaders, there are only two that matter: effective and ineffective. Effective leaders lead successful teams that accomplish their mission and win. Ineffective leaders do not. And this is fairly simple, and I do quite, find it pretty funny that there are a lot of pretty easy definitions for a lot of things out in this world. And there are also, on the other hand, a lot of just really, really complicated explanations or strategies even for really easier things in the world. And which is definitely something that I was quite, just now talking about in the other episode, which was about losing weight. A lot of people just, tell you about certain diets, the keto diet, just make it and you will lose so much weight and whatever. But, at the end, it just comes up to the point that okay, you are eating less than you're needing, and therefore you just kind of lose weight because it's physically just impossible to gain weight when you're not taking in too much calories or taking in more calories than you're actually burning again. But still a lot of people talk about it in such a, I do not want to say scientific way, because science is actually a great and big part of this. But a lot of people have certain diets, and if it's only about losing weight, I do not understand it. If it's about well-being, there are other diets, and a lot of people think that their diet is the best, and a lot of people just think, okay, they are doing a good job with their diet in terms of being healthy, not in terms of actually losing weight, which is important because, yeah. So Willing explains that a leader needs to be humble and understand when they were wrong. Definitely the first point he always made in the book is that if a leader is wrong, he should totally admit it. And this not creates the kind of framework of him not being accepted by the team anymore, but actually being more accepted by the team, because they see, okay, he's truthful, he's not kind of blaming somebody else, and he's actually kind of, he's just knowing he made something wrong, and they really, really kind of respected him for doing that. And I hope they just point out his story. When not, I will totally do it because it was an interesting one. Owning up to mistakes and establishing a way to right any error is fundamental to being an effective leader. Leaders need to leave the ego at the door, and the agenda is entirely devoted to their team. Is it actually agenda or agenda? Agenda. It is agenda. Sorry. They need to forget about themselves as an individual. Willing's perception of an effective leader is someone who is able to focus purely on their team and the task at hand, and not, on themselves. Leadership and responsibility. Something that all leaders need to keep in mind is that you are entirely responsible. It all comes down to you. You're, the last line of defense, as Gary Vee always, talks about it, which is totally true. Because at the end, a lot of your employees or a lot of your teammates will just fuck up something, but at the end, it is first of all your responsibility that your mission is doing well, because you are the leader, you are leading the fucking mission. And it's just at the end comes up to you, because you're doing everything, and therefore you're the one to be blamed. And Willing explains that this responsibility is at the core of being an effective leader, and that's why he calls it extreme ownership, and you really have to own the actions and outcomes of the team behind you. This responsibility goes for any successes and any failures. It's not all about the good outcomes. You have to own it when things go wrong. Willing explains that in any organization, the leader must face up and take all of the blame. The ability to acknowledge any failures and own up to mistakes is a fundamental part of being an effective leader. You then need to establish a plan on how to fix any mistakes made, and it is all down to the leader at the end. But what about when the team members aren't doing as instructed, or the actions have led to the problems? Then it is up to you actually just giving them right instructions, or actually instructions that they understand, or throwing them out of the team. Also a possibility. Regardless, Willing stresses the importance that an effective leader will never blame their team. Part of extreme ownership is understanding that your team members' actions are a reflection of your leadership. Leaders are required to ensure that the team is well-informed, well-practiced, and able to perform as expected. Any issues from team members reflect on the leader, not on the team themselves or the team members themselves. When you have an underperformer, as a leader, it is inevitable that you will at some point come across a team member that is underperforming and essentially letting the team down. In this situation, Willing explains that it is the leader's responsibility to dedicate time to mentoring and training them with the aim of getting them up to scratch. In cases where this works, then you can consider this as a success. However, Willing explains that there will be circumstances where someone continues to underperform. When this happens, it is important that the leader makes the tough decision to let them go, opening up a spot for someone else who is able to do what is required of them. And this is definitely the point that they made in the book, which was about, and I'm really trying to not spoil anything because I do not actually know if they just explain or just point out a few stories, but yeah, there was a story about in the SEALs boot camp, which is actually the place where the SEALs, are pretty much made, and they just, really decide who is a SEAL and who is not a SEAL. And there's something like Hell Week or it's Hell Week, which is, a week where you do just, have very, very less sleep, quite, less amount of food, and, a lot of circumstances that are just not good for you performing at your highest. And then I think it was in this week, I think it is. I think. And at the end of this week, they pretty much decide who is, pretty much able to go on, I think, with another SEAL training, and who is not, at my point of view. I think, but, just look it up. You can totally find it, I think. But in this Hell Week, so-called Hell Week, they had a test about having a boat. It was some kind of plastic rubber boat, not board, but boat, which is, totally something you can imagine. It's pretty heavy, even though it's, just made of rubber plastic, it's pretty heavy, and they just, have to carry it into the sea, because they're actually training on the beach or somewhat, and they're just running into this fucking sea with the boat on their hands or on their head, on their hands, both, and they're just throwing it in, and the fastest one who just gets out in the sea, turning one way around some kind of, thing that's, just, a little bit, just standing in the water, whatever this is called, and then go back and actually go to the place where they actually just started. I think. I'm not quite sure, but I think this was actually the case. The problem was that there was, first of all, a team that was always underperforming, and they always called them the Smurf team, I think. No, it was actually because they were all so little in terms of their height, actually. I think this was actually the reason why they called them the Smurf team. But at the end, which is, basically a point that is just, has to be made to the other point that they pointed out, is that a leader is basically the one who just is responsibility for having a great team, quite. Because there was always a team who was just doing great. This team just always won, nearly, I think, one time they didn't win, but and there was a team that always just lost. Every single race, they lost it. And, always the team that won had a few minutes of rest, which was, definitely something a lot of people strived for, because in Hell Week you didn't have a lot of rest. And therefore this was something pretty precious. But the end it was like, okay, the leader of the very, very best team, this team that has always won, changed with the leader of the very worst team. And the thing was that it changed so much that the leader then of the loser team quite just made the second place in the next race. The other ones just got last place, if I remember correctly. And this really emphasized for me the point that a leader is really making just a good team, even though there are sometimes, and they also pointed out they also pointed out or underlined the point of having weak links, that they just have to, so a good leader even is able to kind of link everyone together and is pretty much able to have a good team, even though sometimes not everybody's just good or whatever. So a leader who exercises extreme ownership must be loyal to the team and the mission above any individual, and it is all on the leader. Willink acknowledges that it is not easy, an easy task to be a leader, and it takes a complete responsibility, especially when facing a failure. An effective leader has to have qualities of humility and courage. Being able to let go of your own ego and consistently work on weaknesses and solving problems is the only way to build an effective team and have successes. And although the leader must take full responsibility for any failures, Willink explains that this is not the case for success. Instead, the leader will credit the team and the members for success and positive outcomes. Yeah, totally. It's really like, okay, you quite know that you are the link that, or you're the person who is really just making the team, but you still just, be like, okay, this is not my agenda, or this is not my trophy that you just win by, kind of achieving your mission or your goal of the mission. But you actually be like, okay, this was the team. It was not me, even though you're actually the leader and you're the one who pretty much makes the team, but it was the team. A bad leader is a bad team. It is important to remember that a bad team is credited to bad leadership. If you're not given the proper guidance and training, then you cannot expect them to be effective. Willink emphasizes the importance of a leader who establishes their expectations from the beginning. Make it known what is expected of every team member and be constantly striving for improvement. And this is how a leader should lead. The team should be able to continue on their own without further instruction, even in the absence of their leader, which is, I think, actually the point that a lot of teams are quite willing to get to. Because if you're able to just create a team or kind of teach a team your instructions or whatever you're teaching them, so that they actually do not need you anymore. I think this is actually just the really, really goal you're having as a leader. That your team actually doesn't need you anymore and could basically accept any leader that might not be as good as you are, but they're actually so good and they're actually so good trained by you that they just are strong no matter what. So when leaders who what the fuck? This is actually a word. This is actually a word. It's EPITOMIZE, which is pronounced epitomize, which is actually the same thing in fucking German. Okay. Always great to have words translated, in another language, which basically then just mean the same. Thank you for that. So when leaders who epitomize extreme ownership, I think this is just, kind of have extreme ownership, drive their team to achieve a higher standard of performance, they must recognize that when it comes to standards as a leader, it is not what you preach, it is what you tolerate. Okay, and also something that I was quite thinking about is that if you're a leader and you kind of recognize that maybe there is another leader or there's another person that might, actually be, a better leader than you are, even in your team, then you should actually, I think, be like, okay, even though it's quite hurting your status or your pride or whatever, you should be like, in the sake of the team, be like, okay, this guy is better than I am, and therefore he should actually be the new leader. I'm going back into the team as a regular team member, not as a leader, but so that the team is benefiting from that, and just really taking you out of the whole system as a fact of just having a great team. Willink talks about the battlefield a lot, both literally and figuratively, whatever. So he explains that in both his situations, there are never bad teams, only bad leaders who fail their teams. And this is possibly the most important thing any leader needs to fucking remember. And I do quite remember to pretty much not look at myself all the fucking time, but rather, this is working, yeah. Rather have my recording system, anywhere else, but not on this screen or desktop that I'm working quite right now. So leaders need to believe. Willink stresses the importance of a leader truly believing in the mission or task at hand. If the leader does not believe in the work they are doing, how can they expect to inspire their team members too? This is actually a good point, and this actually makes sense, because if you are like, I give a fuck about it myself, you do not have pretty much the energy and pretty much the kind of felt passion to really kind of infect your team members with that sort of passion and to really motivate them and really just, pump them up for this certain mission. So if a leader does not believe, he or she will not take the risks required to overcome the inevitable challenges necessary to win, and they will not be able to convince others. Definitely. So a leader needs to carefully consider the mission and ensure that their beliefs, thoughts, and vision can align with the actions and outcome of the mission. Willink explains that it becomes pretty clear when a leader believes in the work they are doing, it becomes clear to all of the members, and it is easier for them to follow suit. Totally. Who the fuck wants a fucking leader that is like, I actually don't want to, who is actually himself or herself actually, do not want to just talk about males, because there are a lot of female leaders in this world. For example, Merkel, as the German, what is it she called actually? I don't know, but she's a pretty important figure in the world. Also Oprah, which is, incredible woman. There are just a lot of incredible women. And I think, I should point it out a little bit more, and I should actually maybe even learn a little bit more about actual very successful women, because I some sort of only just, read things about people, not people, this is a little insulting, sorry, only read things about males and or boys or whatever, but actually not so much about, girls. Actually, by the way, this is something, the wealthiest people in the world. I do want to see who is actually the first woman. So the richest billionaires, okay, which, would make sense. Fucking shit. This fucking shocked me. The world's billionaires. Can I have just a ranking, please? 2018. Sorry for interrupting, but I'm pretty curious. So Jeff Bezos is definitely the first one. Bill Gates with a drop down arrow, because he actually really donates a lot of his earnings, and therefore, Then Warren Buffett, then Bernard Arnault, which is from France, and Mark Zuckerberg, which is actually the fifth one. Okay, he stayed actually the same. I think Mark Zuckerberg was actually the fourth one. Then Amancio Ortega. Carlos Slim, this is actually not that such a Charles Koch, and David or Koch, whatever. What is Koch Industries? What they do? Sorry for interrupting. Ego. That's pretty. I always quite tend to look up things that I'm interested in on the most or on the baddest or worst times or worst situations, or in the worst situations. So as we previously discussed, a leader really has to ignore their own ego and any personal inspirations or aspirations. What is an aspiration? Okay. Willink explains that having an ego can be dangerous as it clouds your judgment. Things like constructive criticism and advice can be ignored due to an overactive ego. Definitely. And Willink points out that there is a big difference between confidence and being cocky. A leader should always be confident but never cocky. Totally true. Confidence is also important in terms of actually believing in what you're doing, I think, at my point of view. And being cocky is actually just, really kind of cutting out every constructive criticism, which is totally something you should not do. And therefore, I would really suggest you to go through Thank You Feedback, which is also a book that I've been talking about on this channel or on this podcast as well. Quite a good book about how to give feedback and how to receive feedback and what to, look out for and what to just, what's the best way to. But there is an actual summary on the internet, or also just, go through the whole one. Laws of combat and laws of leadership. When discussing the Navy SEALs, Willink discusses what he considers to be one of the most important tactics: cover and move. I actually, pretty much remember the story behind this one. So this pretty much translates to teamwork. Teamwork requires every single member working collectively towards the same mission. So we know that teamwork is essential, but it's the leader's job to keep everyone on task. Leaders need to remind each team member that they are not an individual, but part of a large whole. A successful, so not a whole like, you can look through, but a whole like, a whole piece. A successful team works together seamlessly, but each member has to do their part and support each other. And Willing explains that when a team reacts success, every individual team member gets to share their responsibility for the success, and also, on the other hand, also for a loss. And I think, to use this amount of time, I kind of want to explain the story that was made, or just was, pointed out, or just, the story that pretty much made this point, or explains the point Willing made in the book, which was that, there were actually, if I remember correctly, I hope, there was some kind of trouble in terms of communication in his, I think, Iraq. It was Iraq, in his Iraq mission as a Navy SEAL commander, actually. And so there were certain problems, and I think whether it's in terms of solving the problem or whatever, but at the end it was like he just went into a very, very fucked up situation, where he just pretty much was kinda chased by the terrorists, or by the let's say terrorists. Actually, at the end, he was just with a team member, if I remember correctly, and just really stuck into a place that wasn't that good. At the end, it was actually pretty about cover and move, because he just covered his teammate, and then through shooting at the other ones, and the other way around as well, until they pretty much got to their destination, pretty much got out of this very, very just really fucked up situation. They just solved it pretty well, even though the other ones had an RPG thrower, which is actually some kind of rocket, if you don't know, which is actually just incredible to kind of think like, okay, they are shooting a fucking rocket with a lot of fucking power in it at me, and this was, I think, due to an communication failure, and he just really looked for his team, or kind of really wanted to solve this kind of situation, but at the end, as I explained, he got into a very, very bad situation, but through covering and moving with his teammate, he was actually able to just get out of the situation and just move to the place that he wanted to. I do not know whether it's because he didn't know where this way is going, so that he got stuck, or in terms of something else. I don't remember correctly, I'm sorry. But yeah, I think it's totally great that I can kind of contribute a little bit more to the actual books that I'm discussing as a summary, because I read the book, even though it was only about, I think, 100 pages that I've read. But this is actually quite a lot, I think, and and this really reminds me of Seth Godin, because he only reads books until he gets to the point where he says, okay, I understand the plot of the book, I understand the meaning and the message of the book, and then he just stops reading and gets to another book. Maybe this is his way to just be able to read 1,000 fucking books a year. But yeah, if it worked for him, it's fine, which is always important. I quite always should emphasize a little bit more that if you're happy with your life you're having, it is totally okay for me, and I have nothing to say. If it's like, okay, you're not happy and you're doing dumb shit that's not making you happy, or therefore your life is not happy for you, then I will just really get kind of aggressive. Then I really just stress around and, try to put you in a better place. But you have to be conscious about that, the things you're talking about and the things that you are, or that are valuable for you, do not have to be things that are valuable for other people. Therefore, just generalize a lot of things, and therefore pretty much say, okay, you have to do this and that or whatever. Um, yeah, don't do that, because if people are happy, everything is totally fine and everything is okay, and I think the world is good. If the people are just happy. And I'm still seeing this on the other side here. There are some glitches, and I'm pretty sorry for that. I do not know why it is like this. Maybe there is a way to solve it, but it's okay right now, I think. But yeah, with that being said, I hope you have a wonderful day and or night, and don't forget, to just look at your legacy and try to be very nice in a macro. Sometimes in a micro it's not working that well, but that's also okay as long as you're just watching out in a macro. But yeah, I wish you a wonderful day and success, health, wealth, happiness, and I hope you're giving back something, because this is also important. And do not forget, as I said, about your legacy. With that being said, I wish you a goodbye.